This video is sponsored by Supremacy World War III. More on that later in the video. The Russian military is in a complete panic right now. Ukraine has recently unveiled its new Flamingo cruise missile, and it's already completely changing the nature of the battlefield in ways that few people have truly noticed. The Flamingo has already had its first successful strike, but the direct impact of strikes like these isn't actually the main thing we're talking about. Because in ways that few people are appreciating, this weapon very well could become the tool that tips the balance of the war heavily in Ukraine's favor. In fact, a Ukrainian victory over time may now be inevitable, but perhaps not for the reasons that you might at first expect. The Flamingo is significant, not just because of how it is already being used, but also because of what it's capable of in the winter months ahead. And perhaps most importantly, how its mere existence places Russia in a dilemma that they cannot escape from, even if the Flamingo itself is never fired at a vital Russian target, which it will be. This cruise missile is being introduced at a pivotal moment. Russia has recently been having an increasingly difficult time dealing with existing Ukrainian long-range strike capabilities on Russian territory. And until now, most of these deep strikes have relied on drones, which, while effective, can only carry small payloads and cause limited damage. Nevertheless, Ukraine's drone campaigns alone have already been absolutely devastating to Russia, taking out everything from oil refineries and storage depots to other energy facilities, rail hubs, ammunition depots, arms factories, and more. You name it, Ukraine has struck it, often as deep as thousands of kilometers inside of Russian territory. On top of this, in recent months, we've seen a significant change in Ukrainian drone tactics, making things even worse for Russia. Ukraine has been stepping up their strikes against energy facilities in particular, hitting the same targets not just once, but over and over again, until they're forced to go offline. It's devastatingly effective. Unlike earlier Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure, this isn't just harassment. Now, it's a deliberate campaign to cripple Russia's energy and logistics networks as Russia heads into what is shaping up to be a very cold winter. And due to apparently glaring gaps in Russian air defenses, which Ukraine has wedged open over time by slowly but surely taking out Russian air defense systems, Ukraine now has the ability to simply keep striking almost at will until the damage on a specific facility becomes impossible for Russia to recover from. It's difficult to overstate how significant this damage has already been, which the Flamingo cruise missile will now only serve to accelerate. Ukraine's deep strikes have been so effective that this year they essentially neutralized Russian offensives along the front. Constant drone attacks shredded Russia's logistics network by smashing rail lines, rail hubs, combat vehicles, and resupply trucks, leaving the frontline troops consistently low on food, water, ammunition, and fuel. And where there are no supplies, there is no offensive, no pushing forward, no progress made, no matter how much Vladimir Putin yells that he wants results, and he wants them immediately. But the impact of these strikes goes beyond the battlefield in Ukraine. In fact, while it might seem strange to say it, the true front line of this war may not actually be the front line. Right now, many regions inside of Russia are experiencing gasoline shortages, in a country that is supposed to be one of the world's energy superpowers. Ukraine's relentless drone campaign has hammered Russian oil refineries so hard that Russia simply can't keep up with the immense pressure. And it's in this context that now, the Flamingo cruise missile is joining the fight, turning Ukraine's existing long-range campaign into something that Russia can no longer ignore. The intricacies of Ukraine's strategy here are fascinating to analyze. But first, for those who are fascinated by military strategy, you'll also likely enjoy the sponsor of today's video, Supremacy World War III, a free online PvP strategy game where you can command a modern nation's economy, diplomacy, and high-tech armed forces. Supremacy World War III is a phenomenal game where anyone can put their strategic skills to the test, leading a real country in modern global warfare as you compete against up to 99 other players in real time in games that take place over weeks. It's a true deep strategy game where you can build your army with modern tech ranging from tanks to jets to submarines, while you also work to forge alliances, declare wars, and conquer the world. Supremacy features advanced mechanics, like advanced research trees where you can unlock cutting-edge military technology. You can choose your strategy, engage in battles strategically, and conquer the world against real player opposition. Right now, viewers of the Icarus project can get started on Supremacy World War III for free, along with an exclusive starter pack containing a free elite bomber unit, a value of $25 US. Just click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to claim your bonus. The offer is valid for the next 30 days, so don't delay. Thanks again to Supremacy World War III for sponsoring today's video. It's hard to overstate how effective the mere existence of the Flamingo cruise missile has already been. Using the Flamingo cruise missiles directly, Ukraine will be able to enhance their ability to strike Russia by many magnitudes. With a longer range and faster speed than drones, these cruise missiles will not only be able to strike deeper within Russia, but they'll also be able to move much faster than Ukrainian drones do, making them much harder to intercept. And on top of that, these cruise missiles can carry a much higher payload of up to 1 ton. That will allow them to take out entire Russian facilities, often with a single missile, something that would take dozens, if not hundreds of drones to accomplish, if it could be accomplished with drones at all. And so when we consider the damage that the drones themselves have been able to do, the Flamingos really must have the Russian military, and especially Vladimir Putin, in a complete panic. However, while all those details might look significant enough on the surface, it turns out that as we dive deeper into each of those aspects and what specifically each of them unlocks, we can really see clearly how the Flamingo cruise missile is Russia's worst nightmare. This is perhaps the most apparent when we look at the range of the Flamingo cruise missile, which is over 3,000 kilometers, large enough to hit every Russian target west of the Ural Mountains, which is the majority of the populated area of the Russian country. And specifically, the Flamingo cruise missile alone now brings within range of Ukrainian strikes 70 out of 90 Russian air bases, and over 120 different oil and gas facilities. There's a couple of different aspects to why this is significant. First, there's obviously the ability of Ukraine to actually strike these targets and take them out. That's a given. But there's also the other aspect where just Ukraine having the theoretical ability to hit all of these different targets is going to force the Russian military to start behaving differently today, even before Ukraine actually strikes anything. We can see this, for example, when we look at the early stages of the war and how Russia positioned their aircraft versus how Russia positioned their aircraft later in the war after Ukraine got permission to strike deeper within Russia, at that time using Western missiles that had a much shorter range than the Flamingo does. Early on in the war, Russia positioned all of their aircraft very close to the front lines because Ukraine basically had no ability to strike them without getting in major trouble with their Western suppliers. This, in turn, allowed Russia to conduct a lot more assaults with those aircraft because they were so close to the Ukrainian borders, and it allowed Russia to do this at a much lower cost, because obviously not having to fly as far meant that the aircraft did not have to use nearly as much fuel, nor did they require nearly as much maintenance. But when Ukraine got the permission to strike as far as these air bases were located, Russia was forced to move all of their aircraft much deeper within Russia, which immediately lowered the amount of strikes that they were able to conduct against Ukraine, and raised the cost of each of those strikes as well. Now, that equation is about to get magnitudes worse, because the Flamingo missile can hit pretty much all of the air bases that Russia is actively using today, which means that Russia is going to have to relocate most of their aircraft far deeper within Russia, if they haven't already. This will immediately reduce the ease with which Russia is able to actually conduct aerial assaults on Ukraine. As these aircraft retreat, the 20 remaining Russian air bases that are out of range of the Flamingo missile will not have enough capacity to carry all of the aircraft coming from the other Russian air bases, which means that no matter what, a large portion of Russian aircraft are going to be vulnerable, unless Russia chooses to allocate more anti-aircraft around each of these bases, which creates its own difficult dilemmas. And that's just one example of one category of the battlefield that the Flamingo disrupts. All of this plays into the real significance of the Flamingo cruise missile. Just its existence, even if it's not actively being used, still affects Russian strategy. Because with all of this vast variety and quantity of targets now within range, Russia is going to have to think differently about how they position their aerial defenses, which they are already critically short on. Russia is going to have to choose to protect certain targets and leave certain targets within Russia undefended. That is going to not only stretch Russia's air defenses more thinly than they already are, but it's also going to mean Ukraine has the ability to hit a lot more targets, a lot more freely. This will not only make it easier to hit targets with the Flamingo missiles, but it will also make it easier for Ukraine to hit other targets with their drones, as they already have been. We already know there are major gaps in Russian air defenses, which is why Ukraine keeps getting through. And now those gaps are only going to get bigger, which means the Flamingo will be able to do its job. But on top of that, the drones Ukraine is using today can also do their job even better as well. That's the range side of the equation. And when we look at it carefully, we realize that this is not just a progressive unlock for Ukraine, but it's actually an exponential unlock, where the Flamingo not only unlocks new things for them, but it also allows them to do the things they were already doing far better. And the same thing is true when we look at the payload of the Flamingo cruise missile and what that's going to unlock for Ukraine. First and foremost, there's the obvious fact that a higher payload on a cruise missile versus a drone unlocks new categories of facilities that Ukraine can actually strike. An additional way that the existence of the cruise missile will spread Russian air defense thinner, but also because the payload is so much larger. It means that Ukraine can strike the facilities they have currently been striking much more fiercely, and destroy them much more thoroughly and much more permanently. This itself is also highly significant. Let's make the assumption, which certainly won't be true, but helps to explain the impact, that the Flamingo cruise missiles are only used to strike Russian refineries that Ukraine has already been striking with drones. When we look at that equation, we realize that with drone strikes on refineries, Russia has had refineries be offline from weeks to months at a time, with the offline periods getting longer the further we get into the war. This is because Russia doesn't have enough parts or have enough technicians to keep up with these repairs. Before the war, Russia was always heavily reliant on Western companies to carry out those roles. Once you factor in the Flamingo and the fact that the damage can be much more thorough and take much longer to recover from, you realize that this has an exponential impact, where far more Russian refineries will be offline at the same time. And with far more refineries offline at the same time, that not only means Russia has less refining capacity overall, but it also means that each incremental piece of refining capacity is harder to recover, because the country only has so many spare parts, and the country only has so many technicians to carry out necessary repairs. With the combination of the Flamingos striking really hard, and drones striking really frequently, and all over the place, you will see Russia at a point where there are far more refineries destroyed or damaged than they can actually handle, which will make the refining problem incrementally and then exponentially worse, because these new missiles are now in the equation. And the same thing rings true of most other categories of facilities that Ukraine is striking as well. Currently, Ukraine says they can produce 1 Flamingo cruise missile per day, but that production is going to be ramped up to 7 per day by the end of October. When you consider this capacity, 7 per day, 210 per month in a 30-day month, that means Ukraine will have more than enough Flamingo cruise missiles each and every month to strike every single Russian refinery, even accounting for the number of them that will likely be intercepted by Russian air defenses. Not only that, but because Ukraine can definitely produce more Flamingo cruise missiles faster than Russia can repair facilities, this means that Russia will effectively have no ability to recover from this while they remain at war, which has got to be Ukraine's main goal. Paralyze the Russian economy to force Russia into negotiating, giving Ukraine their territory back, and ending their war. At this phase of the war, it seems possible that no Western sanctions are needed, and no massive concessions are needed. Ukraine is now able to apply their own kinetic sanctions to do what Western governments have been unwilling and unable to do. And it will be Ukraine, and not Western governments, who gets the glory. There are other categories of targets we can still consider. For example, there is the Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Crimea to mainland Russia. With these cruise missiles, Ukraine will have the ability to strike this bridge at a time of their choosing, with enough force to actually take the bridge out. And whether or not they actually do this soon, their mere ability to do this will change the calculus for Russia. We see Ukraine at least trying to see this idea in the minds of the Russians on Crimea, as around the time of announcing the launch of the Flamingo cruise missile, Ukraine has recently been taking out air defenses around Crimea all over again. Some people assess that Ukraine's strategy here might be to take out the Kerch Strait Bridge as soon as possible. This would make Crimea a very chaotic place that Russia would then have to deal with. And this would be very embarrassing for Putin, something that would distract Russia and detract from their overall war effort. That is a real possibility. I think it is less likely, though, than another possibility. My personal assessment is that Ukraine wants the Russians who are living in Crimea to have the fear that someday soon they might not be able to leave the peninsula. And Ukraine wants to use this fear to actually start clearing the Crimean Peninsula of the Russian population that Russia moved on to Crimea after they annexed it from Ukraine. Ukraine's goal may be to make the people in Crimea terrified that if they don't leave Crimea via the Kerch Bridge soon, they may never have another chance. A lot of people know that after Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, they relocated a lot of Russian citizens there, not only to Russify the region, but also to make it a humanitarian crisis if Ukraine ever takes this territory back. and it really is a difficult situation for Ukraine to handle. However, if Ukraine demonstrates to these citizens that at any time they can destroy the Kerch Strait Bridge that is connecting them to their mainland, making it so that the only way for them to get back to their homeland is to go through the war-torn regions that Russia has recently taken from Ukraine, with the fuel shortages in the occupied regions reaching a critical point, these citizens might be inclined to start their exodus sooner rather than later. It's a kind of get-out-while-you-can scenario, and I think personally that Ukraine is going to be able to make that happen because of this new cruise missile. Whatever the case, when we look across the board, we see that this new cruise missile doesn't just give Ukraine military options. It also helps to reduce the strength of Russia without Ukraine having to actually do anything, forcing Russia to move things around, to relocate, to vacate certain positions, before Ukraine can destroy them. This means that just the psychological presence and existence of the weapon has an impact all on its own. I think Ukraine is likely to use the missile in a number of different ways in response to the way that they see Russia reacting. They have a number of different targets to choose from. They can be patient and choose the targets that are the least defended and the most impactful. Russia, for their part, has a dilemma. They can make choices to reduce the impact of the Flamingo in certain areas, but by doing so, they will increase the impact of the Flamingo in other areas. And in the end, they are left with no good options, just some that are slightly better than alternatives. The Flamingo cruise missile isn't just another weapon. It's a game changer that forces Russia to rethink everything about how they continue to fight this war. Whether Ukraine uses it to destroy key infrastructure, shut down Russia's oil refining, or simply to keep Russia guessing, its impact is already being felt far beyond the battlefield. And this is only the beginning. As Ukraine ramps up its production, we're going to see even bigger shifts in the months ahead. If you want to stay ahead of what's coming next, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss our next deep dive into how this new weapon is reshaping the entire war for Russia. Before you go, don't forget to claim your exclusive starter pack on Supremacy World War III with your free elite bomber unit, a value of $25. Start playing for free today, put your strategic skills to the test, and lead your country to victory against real players in the ultimate immersive strategy game.